The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 60.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Thank you for joining us on the EL. Today we have Blake Masters, co-author of 0 to 1. Welcome, Blake, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thanks for having me, Wade.
Absolutely. Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Sure. My name's Blake Masters. I'm a new dad. I have a 4-month-old baby, but I live out in San Francisco with my wife and child. Currently working on a book with Peter Thiel. It's published next Tuesday. September 16th. I've co-founded a legal research technology startup called Judicata. Prior to that, I was at law school at Stanford and worked as an early salesperson at Box. It's my quick bio.
Thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into the book that you were just discussing, 0 to 1, which will be made available here coming up soon, next Monday, like you said, September 16th, 2014. And you and Peter, is it Peter Thiel? Is that how you say his name?
Teal, like the color.
Gotcha. Okay, Peter Thiel. And so, Blake, we're going to move quickly, but we're going to talk about the top questions that our audience would like to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing 0 to 1?
So the book is actually based on a class that Peter Thiel taught at Stanford in 2012. It was called CS 183 Startup. And Peter's goal in teaching the class was to tell I think there were about 150 students in the class. He told us everything he knew about business. And so I took really good class notes. I cleaned them up a little bit. I put them online. And then the notes actually wound up getting read by like hundreds of thousands of people. So they became basically required reading in Silicon Valley. And, Peter Thiel's musings on business, they kind of wax philosophical, but there's also a lot of practical, concrete advice for entrepreneurs who are seeking to build the next great tech company. So the book is really me and Peter's Act 2. We really liked the notes. We felt like it reached a wide audience, but not as wide as we need. We really need a lot of new technology. We need a lot of great businesses to have any sort of good future at all. And so what we did was we took the course, which lasted 3 months. And with the book, we distilled it to 200 disciplined pages, so that you can actually use it. So these are sort of ideas that Peter and his colleagues at his venture fund, Founders Fund, and at his foundation, they've been working on these ideas as they've been investing in building businesses for 15 years now in Silicon Valley. And so 0 to 1 is kind of the distillation of that.
So there'll be a ton of books that will come out this September, along with 0 to 1. What makes your book different from others regarding the same topic?
Well, it's a business book, but we also like to say it's something of an anti-business book. So not always, but I think a lot of times business books take what should be like a 30 or 40 page essay, and then they turn it into like a 300-page book. So there's a lot of repetition and maybe kind of a lot of questionably applicable formulas to follow. And so what we wanted to do was take an opposite tack and say clearly and forcefully what Peter knows about business. And since he's a pretty famous contrarian, he has contrarian views on everything from assessing market size to building a team to distributing a product. The result we think is not just a quick and easy read, but it's something distinctive. So you can't really get his insights anywhere else.
And how would you and Peter want the reader to engage with your book? Is this a book they should start from the beginning and read all the way through, or one that they can kind of go in and cherry pick different information out of it?
Either way. We wrote it knowing that the practical reality is, people don't always read front to back. People like to open up and find value in sort of nonlinear ways. And so because each chapter sort of maps onto a particular class session from the original Stanford class, I think that works. I think you can't just take, sort of at random. And yet, we try to put a lot of thought into the organization. So if you do read it front to back, it is organized, in sort of the most concise and most logical flow. This is everything you need to know about how to start thinking about building a Silicon Valley tech startup.
Great. So now that we know a little bit of the background behind the book, we're to my favorite part. I'm going to hand over the mic and ask that you just take us through, from front to back of what the book's all about. We're really looking for, you're talking to an individual who's wondering if this book is their next great read. Will you do that for us?
Sure. Yeah. Well, in chapter 1, it's where we start by explaining what the title means. So 0 to 1 is about doing new things, going from nothing and creating something, where nothing existed before. We contrast that with 1 to N, which is copying things that already exist and work somewhere and making them work everywhere. So the single word for 0 to 1, doing something new, is technology. And you could think of the single word for 1 to N being globalization, where we take what's worked in the developed nations and we make them work, sort of everywhere else. Both technology and globalization are forms of progress. And yet when we think of progress, most people sort of think of developing, in China and India, and we forget about how to ask, or we forget about asking, how are we developing the developed world? Right. In the United States, you can't just make progress by going from 1 to N. You can't just copy things that work. You have to do new things. We have to figure out ways to go from 0 to 1. So that's kind of the macro frame for the whole book. In chapter 2, we take a close look at the dot-com boom and bust of the 90s, which we think has sort of powerfully shaped how everybody today continues to think about business, because things were like very irrational and exuberant in the 90s. It's kind of insane inflationary period in tech startups and valuations. We've sort of overcorrected, I think, to embrace like a deeply pessimistic philosophy. So the big thing in Silicon Valley right now is like the lean startup. You're not supposed to have any grand plans for your business. You're not supposed to be too bold. And, you're sort of taught to merely iterate towards smaller successes. But actually, we think that even though the 90s was sort of too exuberant and things were really crazy, people were really optimistic and people had grand visions for the future. And it's that sort of almost hubris, but that sort of positive outlook that is going to drive many successful businesses in the future. Then we move on in the book to get at one of the core themes, which is the distinction between competition and monopoly. So Americans sort of love competition. It's become sort of like a secular religion or a national ideology of some sort of conflate competition with free market capitalism and political debates. And we say how great competition is as a spur to productivity. But the message, Peter and I relate in the book is actually competition is not what you want to be focused on when you're building a business. It can be distracting. You kind of myopically look at what the other person is doing and you match feature for feature. And it's easy to get lost in the competitive herd and fail to actually differentiate yourself. So we think successful business is all about differentiation, and differentiation writ large is monopoly. So when we say monopoly in the book, we don't mean like government favorites, or illegal sort of price fixers, but we mean a company like Google, which is so good at what it does, that it basically owns its entire market. Where the company's name becomes a verb to describe the whole industry. And so we encourage people to think when they start businesses, how is this going to be a monopoly business, as opposed to something more undifferentiated, like a restaurant, for example, which is a really, really hard business to start and sustain. So then we take a different tack about halfway through the book. And, we talk, chapter 6 is called You Are Not a Lottery Ticket. And the idea there is it's a meditation on chance and luck and how far we've gravitated as a society towards explaining things purely in those terms. Pessimism, I think, is obviously self-fulfilling. If you kind of don't think you're going to have a better future, if you don't think you can build a very good business, we won't, and you won't. But in America, we're optimistic, which is good. But really, since maybe the early 80s, the optimism has been so indefinite, and this is true, I think, as a society, and it's been true in business. And we sort of expect, things to get better and better. We expect corporate profits to rise. We expect the stock market to sort of rise incessantly, even though we don't really have any ideas as to why that should happen or how we're going to make that happen, which is paradoxical, we think, because we're definitely not going to have a better future, or you're not going to build a great business if you merely expect the conclusion, to automatically appear without doing the hard work. And so chapter 6 is our call towards sort of reclaiming a definite attitude where you don't just assume things are going to get better, but that if you plan out all the steps in your business, and of course plans change, but you got to have a plan. And if you plan as a society where you want to go, then maybe we can actually get there. We talk a lot about secrets. We have a whole chapter on secrets, and so these are answers to what Peter calls his contrarian question: what very important truth do very few people agree with you on? And that seems like an easy question. Actually, it's really hard. It's really hard to answer because if you have a good answer, you have to know something that other people don't. So you have to think outside of conventional wisdom, and then you also have to be brave enough to tell somebody that. So most of the time you're safe repeating conventions, but whether in business or in other contexts, as soon as you sort of stray from what most people think, you can get into dangerous territory. So like Uber, for example, Uber or Lyft, they have to be very careful about how they talk about their businesses because there are entrenched interests, like taxi cab associations that don't really want to talk about this secret that there's all this spare capacity in all these people's private vehicles or whatever. And so we think by framing, some people call this like a competitive edge or something. But we prefer to call like any advantage, any truth that about your business or your industry that no one else knows. We prefer to call that a secret, because there's something about the terminology that I think captures people's attention and makes them wonder about what other possibilities are sort of on the horizon that are hidden, that I can find, that I can exploit, that I can use to build a really valuable business. We have a few nuts and bolts chapters. We have a chapter about how to sell a product. Silicon Valley tends to be overweight product and underweight sales, even though sales is just as important or perhaps even more important than the product. Where I'm from, San Francisco, there's a lot of sort of nerds who are really good at building things, that build cool products. And, too often you see a startup fail because they've built something cool, but they haven't built a good way to sell it. And if you have a good product, but not a good way to distribute it, then you actually don't have a good product. So we make the claim that it's best to really take distribution seriously and think of it as an integral part of your product. Towards the end of the book, we get a little bit less nuts and bolts and more abstract. Chapter 12 is about computers and humans and how they relate to each other, both now and especially into the future. So everyone's worried right now about robots taking their jobs. The self-driving car is going to usher in the next wave of unemployment for cabbies and chauffeurs and whatnot. But actually, we think humans and computers are so different that they're mostly complementary. So humans are really good at some things. Computers are very good at other things entirely. And, unlike low-skilled workers, which, by and large, low-skilled labor can sort of substitute, people can substitute for each other. Computers and people are so different that they actually just can't. Plus, computers don't compete for resources. They don't want your job. So it's very different from this sort of losing jobs to Mexico outsourcing debate that people have been trying to map on to advances in artificial intelligence and robotics and whatnot. So we think that the most valuable businesses in the coming years will be the ones who understand and leverage the complementary nature of machines and humans. Chapter 13 is sort of a recap of the book, formulated in 7 questions that every startup has to get right. And so we use the clean tech boom and bust of the last decade as a framework to show just how much can go wrong when entrepreneurs lose sight of any of these questions. So in this chapter, we take on the failure meme as well. So it's sort of a meme now in business that failure is good. You learn so much from it. Fail fast, fail often, and failure is great. As this step the step of enlightenment towards building a great business. And actually, we say no. Failure is really costly. It tends to be psychologically devastating. And the real problem is you can't learn that much from it. So if there's 7 questions that every business has to get right, which some of them are like, what recent technological developments have you seen that suggest this is the right time for your particular business to enter the market, or do you have the right team? Is an obvious question. But I would say that if there are 7 questions that you have to get right, and your business fails, it's very hard to go back ex post and pick exactly which questions you messed up. Usually when a business fails, it fails for multiple reasons. And so kind of a clear-headed postmortem is very hard. So I think it's very hard to learn from failure. And it's why we lay out in this chapter why it's so important to think about these questions in advance and make sure you get them right. And we end the book with a chapter about founders. Entrepreneurs. They're always sort of necessarily extreme figures in one way or another. They're often misunderstood. As a society, we simultaneously revere founders like Steve Jobs, but we're also quick to gang up on them and turn these heroes into villains. If a company does something we don't like, the CEO becomes the scapegoat. And so the lesson for founders is that individual prominence always comes at a cost, and that is it can be exchanged at any moment for notoriety and demonization. And so founders need to understand the position that they're in so that they can be effective. And the lesson for business is that we need founders. If you look at the difference between a huge, mega corporation that was founded 80 years ago, whose founders are no longer operating the company, and contrast that with like SpaceX or Tesla Motors, which is both of which are still run by their founder Elon Musk. The difference is staggering. The question for Apple is whether it can continue to innovate now that its visionary founder Steve Jobs is no longer with us. And so we make the claim that we need founders not because they're the only ones whose work matters, but precisely because they're the only ones who make everyone else's work matters. They're the ones who can motivate and inspire the best people to align together in pursuit of a supremely ambitious mission. And so that means as a society, we need to be more tolerant of entrepreneurs who seem strange or extreme, because we're going to need those unusual individuals to lead us beyond mere incrementalism. And so that's the book. It's kind of a freewheeling, half business philosophy, half nuts and bolts. So there's this sport called chess boxing. I always analogize the book to sort of chess boxing. It's literally you have a round in a boxing match, and then you go make a move in chess. And the idea is you need to be physically strong and good on the nuts and bolts, and then you retreat to this more philosophical, strategic pursuit. So we think both of those disciplines are broadly necessary for entrepreneurs, and so we've really tried to mix it up and make a fun and eclectic book.
Blake, that was a phenomenal review. To take so much content and context and put it into just a couple of minutes is not that easy to do. And so I appreciate you doing that. And you're a great communicator, so it was easy to follow along with. And now I'm going to ask you to do something that's even more difficult, and that's now I guess, this fourth question is I think it's fairly difficult. And that's if the reader can only take away one concept or principle or action out of your entire book, everything that you just rolled out for us, what would you want that to be?
I would say, I would just tell people not to compete. Don't compete. Do something unique. And so it sounds, if that sounds contrarian to you, and you learn something just from that soundbite, hey, great. But if it doesn't, if it sounds banal or somehow not fresh, that's fine. Everyone knows it's good to do something unique. But actually, what we really think is that no matter how much lip service we pay to this idea that uniqueness is good in society, you look around and that people are just competing with each other. It's what we do. Peter likes to say, already in the time of Shakespeare, the word ape meant both primate and to imitate. So what we do as human beings, how we even get along in society, is we pay close attention to what others are doing, and we mimic them. It's how children learn languages. It's how we develop, all sorts of social interactions. We pay attention to social cues, and all that stuff really matters because all of a sudden, you're 25 years old or older. You're in a boardroom, and you're making strategic business decisions, and it's very easy to get lost in what your competition is doing. It's very easy to define your product strategy in terms of what adjacent companies in the marketplace are doing. It's actually shockingly hard to rid yourself of this competitive instinct, and we don't claim to be able to fully do it either. But sort of understanding that we're all way more competitive by default, sort of naturally, than we think we are, is the first step towards escaping it. And I think all the the truly great businesses, the true innovators, tend to be they have this singular feel about them, where it's like if you're looking at Mark Zuckerberg and what he did at Facebook, and you're trying to copy that, apply his whatever he did to your business, in some sense you're not learning from him, because you're not doing something unique. And so I think people have to just always question, am I doing this because this is what I can do that's unique and valuable, or am I doing this because it's safe? And I think what's safe is often that's just a shortcut phrase for competing with other people doing conventional things, kind of chasing obvious prizes.
Blake, I think that those that are listening will probably pull out multiple different quotes from things that you've already said in this interview. But this next question is, do you have a favorite quote from your book? Either one that resonates well with you, or one that maybe some people that have gotten an early edition of the book, it's resonated well with them.
Yeah. I do. It's kind of a strange little sentence. I like it both as a piece of writing and also the idea. But the sentence is, the smartphones that distract us from our surroundings also distract us from the fact that our surroundings are strangely old. So it you have to parse it a little bit, but this idea is, you walk around and everyone's sort of looking down, at their iPhones all the time. You're waiting at a subway station. People are just on their phones. It's easy to forget that, okay, yeah, you have this device in your pocket and it's amazing. You can connect to all the world's information in a second, but the subway that's picking you up, or the car that's picking you up, looks a lot like the same thing that would have shown up 40 years ago. And so this one sentence kind of hints at the way in which the progress that we've seen, most people think that we're not in a stagnant society, that we continue to innovate. And that's true, but mainly and almost only in IT, in the computer business. So our phones get better and better every year. And we have a whole new class of web applications. Basically anything connected to the internet or the world of bits has proceeded at a breathtaking rate. And we've sort of forgotten the world of atoms, the world of stuff. We're still growing food in mostly the same ways. We're still burning oil and fighting over it to transport ourselves and whatnot. And so I think, we basically have Jetsons phones in a 1960s America. And it's fantastic that the computer industry has grown so much. And yet we cannot begin to make the mistake of conflating technology with computers, because for a good future, we're going to need to build all sorts of businesses, all sorts of new technology outside the computer industry. And that's, if we do that, we're going to have a good century, and we can really take everything to the next level. So yeah, the smartphones that distract us from our surroundings also distract us from the fact that our surroundings are strangely old.
That's perfect, and definitely makes you think.
That's the plan. That is the goal.
So, Blake, I have no doubt in my mind that a lot of the content that you guys put in this book is going to create a paradigm shift for individuals that are reading, and even some of what you've said for our listeners here today. And that's why this next question is something similar. What's a book that you've personally read that you absolutely just loved? Maybe you didn't love it at the time, but it's created a huge paradigm shift and helped you move forward in your life.
Yeah, it's such a tough question to distill, all these. I think some of the value of reading is just comparing you know, what this author says and what this author says. And when you start to read widely, you get all these connections. And I think maybe the values and the connections between books. So it's really hard to just pick one. I just finished a book not too long ago. It's called The Age of the Moguls by Stuart Holbrook. And it's a book written in the early 50s. It's actually not terribly easy to find a copy. I'm not even sure if it's in print, but you can find a used copy. Holbrook just takes you through, he basically gives like one chapter per, iconic industrialist moguls. There's like a Vanderbilt chapter, a chapter on Carnegie, Rockefeller, Guggenheim. And so, I think you can always read about these sort of titans of the past, these captains of industry, or you could read the Steve Jobs biography by Isaacson. And, you could read about these sort of great individuals and then, sort of like what was his edge? How can I copy that? How can I apply that in my own life? I think it's probably the wrong way to read this stuff. I think the next Vanderbilt or Steve Jobs won't really look anything like those guys, but he will or she will be unique, kind of in a probably in a hyper focused, probably in a somewhat strange way. And so I like to read these stories of these fabulous business successes. And try to just look for inspiration from them, and then look around at the network I've been developing in Silicon Valley. Sort of look at my friends and think about all these other people I haven't met yet, and sort of say like, where's the next one going to come from, right? And like hearing people's kind of crazy pitches, or having friends sort of incubate their startup ideas and see people's ideas take shape. And I'm always sort of just excited to see where the next great capitalist, the next great business builder is going to come from. So I think you got to read about the past, obviously, to figure out where you want to go. But for anyone who wants to read a survey of the sort of, sort of the legends of the late 19th, early 20th century, The Age of the Moguls is a fantastic read.
I haven't been referenced that one before, so I'm interested to take a deeper dive into that.
It's pretty obscure, but I think if you pick it up, you will not be disappointed.
Excellent. Well, Blake, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to get more information on you and your book, 0 to 1?
Absolutely. The book's website is 0to1book.com. And my own site, which has the Peter Thiel class notes from the Stanford class, is just my name as the URL, blakemasters.com. And so I think it can be fun to compare the notes against the book. You sort of see where we started from and where we ended up. And a lot of people go back and read the notes for context and everything like that. But that'll always be a free resource on my site.
No, that's huge. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for coming on today and sharing your guys' creation. I call it your baby sometimes because it definitely takes time to write a book. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for coming on and sharing it with our audience.
Well, thanks for having me, Wade. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you would like to get your hands on 0 to 1 or any of the other resources mentioned by Blake, just look at the show notes at theelpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to theelpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's theelpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.